And so if we think about the world of commodities, it can be things that we may consume, like let's say a corn tortilla. It can be things that make our automobiles run, like gasoline or biofuels. It can be things that keep our houses warm, whether it be lumber or steel or concrete.
Thanks for listening to IBKR's Sense Security. As always, there's more content at ibkrpodcast.com. And if you're interested in learning more about interactive brokers, visit ibkr.com. We offer more trading education content such as webinars, market commentary, market-related courses, and quant-related articles at ibkrcampus.com.
In this episode, we challenged 2023 summer intern Rebecca to research the role of commodities within the global economy. We chatted to her about things she might like to ask the experts and then provided her with names and email addresses of commodities analysts that we know. And the result, this episode, is a compilation of those interviews. Rebecca sat down with Dan Basse, CEO at AgResources.com in Chicago. Dan is a seasoned grains and agricultural commodities analyst. She spoke with Phil Streible, Chief Market Strategist at Blue Line Futures, also in Chicago, and widely known for his knowledge on metals and energy futures. And she chatted with Sean McGovern of Mcalinden Research Partners. At the end of the interview, Rebecca asked each guest what they knew about commodities when they were her age. Those responses are interesting, especially for those of you looking for ideas on career choices. If you're inspired by the content from this episode, please check the show notes for further information about her guests. Rebecca's conversation starts with Dan Basse on commodities in general. Here's Dan Basse.
Could you please tell me what are commodities?
Well, commodities are things that you can hold in your hand and sometimes drop on your foot. They're stuff. And so if we think about the world of commodities, it can be things that we may consume, like let's say a corn tortilla. It can be things that make our automobiles run, like gasoline or biofuels. It can be things that keep our houses warm, whether it be lumber or steel or concrete, or metals. Maybe it's precious metals that we're wearing in our ears or on our fingers. So these are the things that really make life work. And when we think about stuff, it was really something that I believe was germane to the financial markets hundreds of years ago, generations ago. And this is where trading and everything really embroiled from. So I really like the world of things and stuff kind of emboldens what commodities are all about.
That's great. Thank you. So can you tell me about why commodities are important?
Well, we use them every day. I mean, if you think about an average American or an average European or Chinese, I mean, they're putting gas in their car, they're putting food in their mouth, they're doing things in terms of the cotton market, in terms of maybe a t-shirt or a pair of pants. And so all of this goes into the fabric of everyday life. And so when I think of the world of commodities and derivatives that surround it, it involves all of that, including, even the meat markets, whether it's the price of hogs in China or the United States. All of this has big ramifications. And if we distill it down, it's really the reason why, the U.S. central bank and world central banks have been fighting inflation, because they know that our income goes less for far if we have the cost of things or stuff rising. And so this really plays into the entire financial outlook as we think longer term.
Can you tell me a little bit about what the main types of commodities are?
Yeah, they really range, and we can divide them down into softs and hards and tropicals. The world that I spend most of my time is in agriculture, and so it's the things that we eat. And we think about the pillars of the food system as being corn, soybeans, and wheat. A lot of things are derived from those three commodities that we consume every day. And then we can branch away from those soft commodities and we can go to the tropicals, which may be coffee, cocoa, or sugar. Again, key ingredients in baking and lots of other things like chocolate. And then we can go further and we can think about meat commodities, cattle and hogs, and feeder cattle. And then even beyond that, we get into the metals, whether they're industrial metals like lead or copper, or we can make it into the precious metals like silver and gold. And then we'll transition and have another whole group of commodities called energies, which emboldens natural gas, crude oil, some of the biofuels and those kinds of things that really make up that whole structure of keeping the world logistically moving ahead. And when we at end of the day, we even have other obscure commodities such as platinum or cotton or some of the other things. Now, commodities have changed dramatically over the years. When I first got in this business 40 years ago, we had things like pork bellies, which is bacon, and potatoes, which we ate every day. Now, these are not things that are traded anymore. So in the commodity world, we tend to shift from goods that were important long ago who are less important today. We don't trade pork or bacon anymore, nor do we trade potatoes, but years yonder, they were very, very important to the landscape of the financial markets.
Got it. Okay, so how are commodities used in our daily lives?
Well, today you probably walked out your front door, which was more than likely made out of wood. And so front doors are made out of lumber, and lumber is a commodity that we watch and trade very carefully. If you think about the copper market, maybe you drove to work today in an EV, an electric car. Well, copper wiring is very important in that EV and to keep it all going. And in the electrical charge that went from maybe a utility in your neighborhood into your garage through a copper wire. And then you woke up this morning and you may have had a bowl of Cheerios, which was made out of oats, or you may have had a piece of wheat bread, which was made out of hard red winter wheat produced in Kansas. And then you had maybe a piece of bacon or some kind of prosciutto or something like that on your toast. And so again, as we think about our lives, all of these things provide opportunity and provide risk to the producer. And there's a derivatives market which tries to get into the middle of you as the consumer and the producer. Maybe it's an Illinois or Iowa corn farmer or a hog farmer in Heilongjiang, China, or maybe it's a wheat producer in France that's making a baguette. All of these things play to the importance of the world. And we, the commodity world, I think, have more relationships to those kinds of things than maybe a stock price of, let's say, Tesla or IBM, something that's in the headlines, but the basic commodities are something that we utilize almost every day.
Okay, so lastly, what did you know about commodities at 20 years old, and what advice would you give to people who are either in high school or college students listening to this podcast?
One of my big sticks is I grew up on a farm. So my involvement in commodities started at a very young age. And I remember that my father at that point, who wouldn't pay for my college, gave me a herd of hogs such that I could pay to go to school back in Madison, Wisconsin. Some years I made money, some years I lost money. And I finally understood that it was the price of those hogs that went up or down that made the difference in my tuition. With that kind of got me interested in the market. So as a 20-year-old, I would think about the world around you. Where does your food come from? And I'm not talking about whether it's organic or non-organic. I'm trying to think of it more holistically. Does it come from the dairy industry and the milk that you pour in your cereal? Does it come from the copper that comes from the ground in Peru, Chile? These are the things that I think it's important to understand. And it's really super interesting to really step back and say, where does this copper wire, where does this rubber come from for my tire on my car? Where does maybe the platinum that I'm wearing as a wedding ring originate from? And this really has big ramifications, especially if we think about the world as it sits today with the geopolitical concerns that's happening with the war in Ukraine, with Russia's production of crude oil, with OPEC coming back to the fore. I think all of you in the 20 to 30s, if you will, the generation below millennials, should have a big impact and interest in terms of where stuff comes from.
Okay, so Dan, I had some orange juice for breakfast. Is there a futures market on that?
There absolutely is a futures market. It's one of the oldest one on orange juice. In fact, if you remember back to an old movie I recommend everybody, which is Trading Places with Eddie Murphy a long, long time ago, it was one of my favorites. And so if you think about orange juice, that production is now shifted largely to Brazil. There's a Brazilian firm named Catroli that is very important to the world orange juice market. And so not only does it produce orange juice, but we also produce citrus pulp with feed to livestock. And so there's a derivative that comes from each of it. But, orange juice is something that is traded. It's very important to the world landscape. And it just gets, again, to the fabric, if you will, of the importance of commodities that we consume every day. also, if you think about weather, Florida weather has been highly important, along with disease pressures. One of the reasons the United States does not produce much orange juice anymore is because of a localized disease in Florida called green drop. It kind of decimated the U.S. citrus industry, which then shifted demand down to Brazil. But weather throughout the commodity industry plays such a large role. And as we think about climate change, and July 3rd being the warmest day we had globally on record, all of this is going to play very, very large in terms of whether it's the price of orange juice or the price of corn or even the price of a loaf of bread. I mean, we as Americans today spend 6.7% of our disposable income on food. It is one of the lowest in the world, yet we do have the abundance. But I really worry that some of this may change if climate continues to be adverse, producing too much rain in some areas and too little in others.
Well, thank you so much, Dan, for joining us today.
You're very, very welcome.
Let's find out where commodities are used every day. Here's Phil Streible.
Hi, Phil. How are you?
I'm doing great.
Thank you for joining us today. So, how are commodities used in our daily lives?
Commodities are generally described as the raw input in the basic production of a good. It can be something simple as a foundational commodity like agricultural products like corn, wheat, and soybeans, which are probably comprise of much of the percentage of the global population's diet, or even live cattle or lean hogs, things that you are utilizing, over the 4th of July holiday weekend as far as eating. There are also basic goods like energies, metals, like gasoline, natural gas. I would say there's probably about 27 essential commodities, and these are products that you use day to day. Anything that you have that's in your house or surrounding you right now, or that utilize all the way down to just something simple like a pencil that has wood and lead and paint in it. Those are things that are all basic raw commodities.
Gotcha. Okay, so could you tell me a little bit more about why commodities are important?
Okay, commodities, because of the fact that they're the raw input that goes into any type of basic good, pretty much the costs that are involved or the supply and demand or the production of any one of these commodities is going to affect the trickle-down effect of what the price is of the product at the end. Or as maybe the scarcity of a commodity increases, the price of that commodity is going to increase. So when you see something real simple like a drought occurs, which kind of what we're experiencing right now in parts of the Midwest, soybeans are going to have a problem growing, or corn is going to have a problem growing. Therefore, there's going to be less of it available once harvest time comes. So the price of corn or one of these basic commodities is going to go up. Just like when we have conflicts that occur globally and you see oil production affected, what happens? People's gasoline prices go up at the pump, or if there is some other natural disaster, whether it's a frost affecting coffee beans or sugar, you're going to see those prices affect the individual consumer, and that's the leader for why inflation is going higher.
Okay, so what role do commodities play in the stock market?
They're going to affect everything from almost every area in every company is going to have some kind of exposure towards commodities. Even if you were something very simple like an internet-based company that just provides basic services, writing blogs and things like that, you wouldn't think that commodities affect you, but electricity is one of the commodities that electricity prices go up and down. You're utilizing your computer, and then your computer, if you need to buy individual, like a new computer that has a microchip in it and things like that, like NVIDIA or Intel, whatever you're using, all the way down to those chips, they have various commodities in them, different metals and things like that. And the scarcity again of those metals, or if you see sanctions or curbs on exports, it's going to make those particular metals harder to get, and it will drive prices up. So almost any business that's out there, everything from grocers to car manufacturers, they're all very much impacted by the price of commodities.
How can commodities then disrupt an economy?
Oh, very easy. Those are oftentimes one of the things that are most weaponized. You'll see, And we just experienced this where certain countries, when conflicts arise, they'll shut off exports of things like wheat, or they'll shut off exports of platinum or palladium, or reduce their exports of crude oil. And what it does is it has a direct impact on the consumer overseas, because many of these different countries out here, they don't produce these specific things. If you look at platinum, for instance, which is found in a catalytic converter of a car, and it's an essential item for a car, the main producers of it are Russia and South Africa. Well, if Russia curbs their exports, you're going to see cars not being produced because they're going to be sitting on the assembly line waiting for those inputs to come in. South Africa, another country that produces platinum, they could be experiencing rolling blackouts because they have not upgraded their electricity grid. And so they won't be able to mine in the dark or without electricity. So the supply of platinum could be severely strained, causing disruptions from someone simple like a car manufacturer.
What are the ramifications of something like a hurricane?
Now that one could have multiple fold. So me living in Florida, we just experienced Hurricane Ian. And when you had a couple things occurred, the way that hurricane traveled, it went up through the panhandle. That's where and it was really the northeastern part of the panhandle. That's basically Florida's main orange juice growing region. And between that and the freezing temperatures you saw in California just prior to that, you saw the price of orange juice go up exponentially. Now, something else that could occur is there's almost like a checklist of commodities we look for when you see a natural disaster like that. What kind of impact will a hurricane have? Is it a category 1, category 4? What type of area is it hitting? Is it hitting an area that is heavily populated where they're going to need to rebuild a lot of the infrastructure that's there? So you're going to see lumber prices probably go limit up. You'll see things like copper, steel, aluminum, concrete, all these prices are going to go up. And then obviously there's going to be a surge in things like gasoline demand and oil demand, because you're going to need to run generators that rely on those commodities in order to provide that first response assistance to the impacted area.
Great. And as a Florida native, can you speak a little bit more about the orange juice situation?
Yeah, currently right now, orange juice prices are still quite elevated. They never really came down from that last hurricane. If you look at a chart right now, I mean, we've been at a 45-degree angle for most of the year, and it all really started from last year's hurricane. So it takes multiple years for those crops to regrow and repollinate and be able to provide the same output. Many of those crops, it's going to take them 2 and 3 cycles before they'll produce the same amount of fruit that's out there. So it's really quite damaging, and the lasting effects of the prices tend to extend out multiple years.
Lastly, what did you know about commodities at 20 years old? And what advice would you give to either high schoolers or people in college to know more about commodities?
There's a couple things. I was raised a little bit differently. So we were in Northwest Indiana. So I was always surrounded by things like corn and soybeans. And then also we were really into collecting coins and things like that, just how my family had raised me. So I was always exposed to like silver and small amounts of gold and the agricultural products. But really, I would say that someone at like 20 years old or a younger person, that they know more about commodities than what they think. Everything from borrowing some gas money from somebody, or seeing how gas prices impact how much you put in your tank, that's you're already exposed to price fluctuations and supply demand and things like that. Something else about commodities is that a lot of people are attracted to like the stock market because they hear quick gains that were made because of COVID kind of reset a lot of stocks. A lot of the heavily shorted stocks that were just down to a few dollars, we saw these epic squeezes on them. And then ultimately, companies like Bed Bath & Beyond, for instance, had gone completely bankrupt. Where I bring this back to commodities is that the price of a cow will always maintain some value. The price of crude oil or grains or silver or just any one of these various things like copper, they're all going to hold some value that's out there. Someone will need them, so there's an inherent floor on prices. So I really think that, commodities, they've got staying power, and they also impact the economy a lot more than what a person would think.
Well, thank you so much, Phil, for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Here's Mcalinden's Sean McGovern on inherent production challenges given the geographical concentration of many raw materials.
Hi, Sean. Thank you so much for joining us here today.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Of course. What are the challenges associated with commodity production and distribution?
Well, commodity supplies are typically not something that can be created. They are largely derived from natural resources and therefore distributed geographically. When large quantities of a resource like oil or industrial ores are concentrated in one nation or even one region, a small-scale disruption to the flow of those resources can have wide-reaching implications across the world. We can observe this in cocoa's concentration in Western Africa or petroleum's particular concentration within nations that are members of OPEC. In both cases, cartel markets have been established for the purpose of controlling the global supply and thereby manipulating pricing.
So, what did you know about commodities at 20 years old?
Well, I knew what commodities were insofar as we were talking about metals and oil, any kind of raw resource that could be traded. It really wasn't until I got into the business that I started getting into commodities so much and understanding the structure of it. So if you're 20 years old, I would recommend learning to understand where commodities come from, what kind of cartel markets that are out there controlling the price, what kind of countries, governments might be trying to limit the supply, because that's really the most important thing of understanding commodities, that you can only get them in certain places. And so oftentimes commodities are going to be subject to the whims of governments. And if you understand what a government is thinking, you might be able to derive outcomes for prices in commodities.
Thanks for listening to IBKR's Sense Security. As always, there's more content at IBKRpodcast.com. And if you're interested in learning more about interactive brokers, visit IBKR.com. We offer more trading education content such as webinars, market commentary, market-related courses, and quant-related articles at ibkrcampus.com. The analysis in this material is provided for information only and is not and should not be construed as an offer to sell or the solicitation of an offer to buy any security. To the extent that this material discusses general market activity, industry or sector trends, or other broad-based economic or political conditions, it should not be construed as research or investment advice. To the extent that it includes references to specific securities, commodities, currencies, or other instruments, those references do not constitute a recommendation by IBKR to buy, sell, or hold such investments. This material does not and is not intended to take into account the particular financial conditions, investment objectives, or requirements of individual customers. Before acting on this material, you should consider whether it is suitable for your particular circumstances and, as necessary, seek professional advice. Futures are not suitable for all investors. The amount you may lose may be greater than your initial investment. Before trading futures, please read the CFTC risk disclosure. A copy and additional information are available at ibkr.com.